part of our examination of the Northampton Local Plan Part 2. My name is Philip Lewis and this is my colleague Mark Sturgis. We're Chartered Town Planners and are the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this examination, and we will report to the Council in due course. The format of the hearing today is that it will be a structure-focused discussion led by ourselves. This is day 4 hearings, and today we'll be discussing the proposed development management policies. We have a day scheduled tomorrow as a reserve day. We don't expect to use that, but we will use that time to conclude our site visits. And before we move on to our first matter, I'll spend a few minutes outlining some procedural things. Firstly, I'll introduce the Programme Officer Ian Kemp, who's over in the corner of the room. And Mr Kemp works for us, he's independent of the Council and he's responsible for organising the hearing sessions and publication of documentation. And he's the first point of contact if any assistance is needed, and is the way in which you pass messages to us. Now, let's move on to just invite people around the table to introduce yourselves, and start with Mr Everard, please, for the Council.
Okay, yes, my name is Paul Everard. I'm Planning Policy and Heritage Manager for the Northampton team Planning Policy.
Simon Bird QC, providing legal support to the Council.
Noreen Bangs, Planning Policy Team Leader for West Northamptonshire Council, Northampton area.
Amanda Jacobs, Senior Planning Officer, West Northamptonshire Council.
Ben Aspinall, Verdi, Viability Consultants for the Council.
Chris Ragg, Transportation Development Manager at the Council.
Good morning, Richard Wood, Interim Head of Planning and Climate Change Policy at the Council.
John Kirby from Lichfields on behalf of London Investments.
Mavis Wilmshurst for West Hansbury Parish Council.
Councillor Linda Hook, West Hansbury Parish Council.
You're joining us online. We have. You're able to just introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, Sue Green from the HBF.
Good morning, Ms Green. Okay, so as you now know, this is going to be run slightly as a hybrid event today. Ms Green wanted to join us via the internet. Which is something we did in an earlier session where an attendee wasn't able to make it because of COVID considerations. So we'll proceed on that basis. Can I just start by reminding people to have your electronic devices switched to silent, please? And I can invite the Council to explain about fire exits, any fire drills, COVID-19 safety, toilets and facilities, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. We're not expecting the fire alarm this morning, so you have to treat it as for real if it happens, and basically leave by the nearest available exit, which is that way and down the stairs. And people have to assemble opposite the former ASK building on the other side of St Giles Square. Masks need to be worn at all times in the building unless you're seated, and toilets are available on the ground floor opposite the statue of Spencer Percival.
Okay, thank you. Just to remind people that the hearings are being webcast. You should already be aware of that from our guidance note. In terms of timing today, we'll aim to take a mid-morning break around about 11 o'clock at a convenient point, lunch around about 1, and a mid-afternoon break again at a convenient point. When we come to discuss the specific questions, we will always start a particular topic by asking for responses to questions we have, usually starting with the Council, before indicating that we wish others to comment. If you wish to speak, those in the room, please put your name board on the end so we can, in a prominent place so we can see it. And what's the best way of actually dealing with the Mrs Green online? Is there a hands up facility or?
Sue should have a hands up facility.
Okay. Let's just see if that works, please. Oh yes, it's very, very small in the corner of the screen. Yeah, so maybe you might have to do some waving, and hopefully one of us or someone in the room will see. If you can see it, but you're very small on the screen in front of us. So, yeah. one of us will scrutinise that.
I will when you're talking.
I'll reciprocate. Okay, great, thank you. We'll see how it goes. Okay, just to explain very briefly about local plan hearings, because they are relatively infrequent events in the council area, and they are quite different to other planning events you might be familiar with, such as public inquiries, planning hearings, or indeed council meetings. Firstly, these hearings are only part of our examination of the plan. Our examination started when the plan was submitted, and it will not end until we submit our report to the council. We have read the written submissions. They carry the same weight as anything we hear in these sessions. And just to remind people that the local plan hearings have a particular purpose and format. They're concerned with the soundness and the legal compliance of the plan, and in that regard it's unusual for supporters of the plan to take part. It's different to the processes that would be involved if, say, we're dealing with a Section 78 planning appeal. You would have seen that we have been posing questions and will continue to do so. It's because local plan hearings are inquisitorial. It's our role to test the evidence, to test the soundness and legal compliance of the plan. We don't need to hear answers to questions we've not posed, and please don't make general comments. And should we have any observers in the room at any point that aren't actually participating, just to remind people that contributions can only be made by those actually in the meeting around the table and joining us online. And finally, there's no need to repeat points that are already made. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure? Okay. Okay, so we have several participants in the room today and on the screen joining us online. Just wondering whether, given the ongoing COVID situation and in terms of people's timing, would it be beneficial to people whether we bring forward the matters you're interested in and deal with first, so you can get away? Yeah, would that be helpful? Yeah? Okay, so we'll start with West Hunterbury Parish Council. So which particular questions do you want to address first? Do you have a copy of the agenda? Or?
We're here just to ensure that the submission we put in regarding unclassified areas of Labour Park is changed in the local plan to basically protect our community playing pitches and all recreation, which the parish has enjoyed for the last 35 plus years. And we've worked with the borough, the Lake Borough Council about this, and we the whole of the way the plan has been done. In part one, we were concerned that it was left as unclassified, and so we're really concerned that in the part two part of the plan that this is not left as unclassified, and that our submission of reasons why it should be part of the amenity is actually taken into account, and the plan is changed to incorporate.
Okay. In terms of specific questions, I think it probably relates to our questions about sports pitches and sports facilities. So we have some other sort of technical planning questions about those we could come back to. But if you want to maybe explain more about your concerns to us now, and then we can invite the council to respond.
Okay. The concerns are that all around Lazy Park, it's a very large area with a lake on one side of the road, and then the park continues on the other side. And as for the local plan, all the area around it, around these playing pitches, have been deemed as green space, amenity space. But for some reason, the one area which is used the most is actually almost, to us it appears like it's been not looked at properly. Now the sports facilities have been going on there, the pitches, since 2002. The local football club there, Welland Valley, also have a lease on part of that land for proposed toilet facilities for their players, which was granted some time ago. It's interesting that piece where the lease is on a part which is actually part of the plan, which is included, which is rather bizarre because the actual pitches themselves are not included, yet the little part which their lease is on is actually included in the actual plan. So that's a real concern. These playing fields in this area is used daily, almost 24/7 I'd say. We have a lot of dog walkers, we have it used at weekends for sports facilities and things like that. And if we lose this space, there is nowhere else that the football club can actually operate. And we are West Hunsbury. In East Hunsbury, our neighbouring parish, they don't have facilities as we have. So as well as using this sports facilities for West Hunsbury, it's also able to be used by neighbouring parishes as well. And a lot of tournaments go on. And the football team that are there are supported by the FA club as well. It's a properly run club. Also, this particular area has been maintained by a local group, Friends of West Hunsbury Parks, of which Councillor Wilmhurst is a founder member, and have looked after and maintained this area for a number of years. And you might like to talk about that, maybe.
Well, I would just say that the football club actually keep the fields, that particular area, really smart. They mow it more regularly than the council does, so it's a really well tended part of the park. The Friends are there. We've been there since 2009. We do litter picks, but we also have put in interpretation boards around the lake. We've put flower beds under some of the signs, and we maintain those. We also, it is a gated park. It is closed off at night for vehicles, and the Friends, together with the football club, open and close that gate 7 days a week.
Can I also just add that we don't feel that if we don't protect it, I think, is it policy 28? We feel that that comes into this play in terms of protecting our playing pitches and recreation area. And we employed a consultant to do a report, which everyone has seen, by Kirk Wells. In that report, we state our case on how we feel that by failing to protect the playing pitch, informal recreation area under policy 28, it's contrary to paragraph 97 of the National Planning Policy, and we've put our reasons for that in our submission.
Mr. Redrod.
Okay. What we've done, sir, is to we've agreed to change the allocation on the site to amenity green space on the basis of discussions we've had with West Hunsbury Parish Council, and that's set out in the policies map changes, which are exam 2B, and it's policies map change number 3 and plan 3. So we've actually allocated that site as amenity green space, or we propose to. I appreciate this isn't a formal main modification, but that's what we propose to do, sir.
Okay, thank you. One of the vagaries of legislation is that the policies map, which is the ordnance survey-based map, which shows how policies apply, isn't listed in legislation as a development plan document, and so it's not something we can legally examine. Though of course we have an interest in it as part of the examination because it does show how policies are applied. But any changes to the policies map, the council will publish separately to any main modifications to the plan, and the council will then go on and adopt a changed policies map. So have you seen those proposed changes?
I'm not aware that we've seen them yet.
I don't know how to convey it pictorially, but we have the whole area is proposed to be an amenity green space. I
wonder whether it's possible to get an extract of that.
I can actually. Have I printed it out? I may have printed it out, sir. Let's have a look. Yes, I did.
Is it policies not being free?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Does that cover your concerns?
Yes, it does.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Very happy.
And of course the playing pitch would be protected by policy 23 in any case, but yes, you've got that now.
Excellent, thank you. So is there anything else you would like to add?
Thank you.
While we're here? Any other comments?
No, just to say thank you for agreeing to that, because that will certainly be something we can take back to residents and give us the peace of mind that we've been looking for.
Okay, even when we get to the point where the council is consulting on policy map changes, please write into the council and express the views of the parish council and indeed as the private individuals too.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, should we just take a brief 1 minute adjournment whilst the ladies from the parish council carry on with your day?
Thank you very much for seeing us so quickly.
Thank you. Okay, so let's resume. I'll turn now to Litchfield. If you want to, do you want to deal with the matters you want to discuss first, and maybe you can just point me to the questions in particular you want to deal with.
Okay, so our area of concern was in relation to Section D economy and questions through 126 to 130.
Okay. Right, if everyone's happy, we'll deal with that next. Okay, thank you. So I'll start off with some questions then to the council, and we'll take it from there. So in a previous session, we did invite the council to be in a position to explain to us what this plan is trying to do, this Part 2 plan, in terms of the economy and in particular provision of employment, safeguarding employment sites, how it relates to the joint force strategy in terms of consistency, and really what is the plan trying to do in terms of sort of safeguarding, allocating sites, etc., and allowing for things that may come forward. So if the council would perhaps wish to start with you explaining the context of the approach taken in this plan. I'll just remind participants that this is a Part 2 plan. It's one of a number of Part 2 plans that relate to the joint force strategy. And we must bear in mind the principles that came out of the Oxted residential case in terms of whether Part 2 plan should be seeking to address any shortcomings in the policies of a strategic plan. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. And my colleague Noreen Banks is going to handle this section of the inquiry, the hearings, if that's okay with you, sir.
Thank you. If I approach it in this way, I'll focus on the two policies that we are required to be compliant to. That's policy S7 of the core strategy and policy S8 of the core strategy. This local plans approach will meet the requirements of the policies in 3 ways. Number 1, policy 17 seeks to safeguard existing employment areas. Therefore, it is in conformity to policy E1 of the core strategy and bullet point A of policy S8. Secondly, policy 18 of the plan seeks to support employment schemes outside safeguarded area as a way of promoting additional net employment growth and contributing towards the delivery of 28,000 jobs, 28,500 jobs within West Northamptonshire. So this is justified and consistent with policy S7. Policy, and thirdly, policy 38 allocates new developments in the local plan, and the progression of these sites will contribute to the creation of new net jobs. The employment allocations alone are expected to create in the region of 2,900 jobs. In addition, the final unit at Northampton's Panatoni Park is currently under construction, and this is expected to deliver a net increase of 2,800 jobs. Now, although the Panatoni site is in Junction 16 and not in Northampton area, it is a strategic employment site for Northampton by virtue of Policy S8, Bullet Point F, and Policy E8 of the Joint Core Strategy. It is worth noting that the core strategy requires a net increase of 28,500 jobs in West Northamptonshire, and not just Northampton alone. And if we look at the Northampton Gateway site, which is a rail freight terminal, that is currently under construction, and that is located at Junction 15. This is expected to be completed by 2026, and is expected to deliver around 7,300 jobs. The latest joint annual monitoring report concluded that at least 19,500 jobs were created since 2008. The delivery of the allocations in the local plan, Junction 16, Northampton Gateway, sustainable urban extensions, and employment delivery in South Northamptonshire and Daventry will all contribute to the requirements of Policy S7, and we are on track to deliver that.
And in terms of the purpose of this plan, the purpose of this plan is not to set any strategic policy in respect of employment land.
No, it is just to deliver employment allocations which will create new net jobs in the Northampton area.
So in terms of the review of the joint core strategy policies, will that be undertaken through the review of the West Northamptonshire plan in due course?
Yes, it will. Yes.
Just remind us where thoughts have got to on that.
The options consultation is expected to close at noon on the 24th of December.
Have you got anything, Mr. Sir?
Not on it.
Okay. Thank you for the background. And maybe invite in contribution from Litchfield now so you can explain your concerns. And if you want to just explain your particular concerns in respect of the individual policies at this point, 17 and 18, I think that would be quite useful if we can get the council to respond to that.
Yes, so I think it would probably be quite helpful actually to start with policy 18, because I think what I have to say is a relatively supportive but minor point which we would suggest is required in order to ensure that the policy is sufficiently clear and meets the tests of soundness. I think from my client's perspective, we would very much welcome and have welcomed through the representations that we've made the introduction of policy 18. Policy 18, however, we would very much welcome, unfortunately, in terms of the way it is expressed, introduction of policy 18 is slightly unclear. Policy 18, however, we would how the site, unfortunately, in terms of outlying projects could be assessed slightly unclear. The policy 18 knows how to text to explain what matters to the outlying projects. Now, any project coming forward as a slightly underwing for development, of course, is subject to planning applications. Indeed, now any project application will have slightly underwing for development, progressing through the planning process as we speak. Indeed, now any project policy 18, as I said, sets out that the site will need to be assessed so to speak. Policy 18, now it seems to me that any planning application needs to be assessed against the policies development. Policy 18 and any material consideration. It seems to me that, and I would suggest that planning application needs to be assessed against policy 18 to be made. Policy 18 and any material explicitly clear to me, and I would suggest that the simple addition of those words, such as to be very clear that the site has been explicitly clear to me, and I would suggest that the site has been issued to assess against policies and any site has been under consideration has been suited. The site has been issued to assess against policies and the rest of the sentence. Any site has been under consideration associated with has been suited. I think that's a simple change that's been made to just avoids pitfalls of a management team seeking to interpret planning policy. I think that's a simple change through the contained planning application going forward. It makes pitfalls of a abundantly clear what needs to be assessed, what key tests. I think that's a simple change through the contained planning application. We just simply need to say that we're not what hindering year or two on time tests. I think that's a simple change through the contained planning application. We just simply need to say that we're not what hindering year or two on time tests. I think that's a simple.
I think it's isn't that implicit in any policy plan that the policies in the plan I think it's to account and to considerations as well. Isn't that implicit in it doesn't have the plan that the policies in the plan I think it's to account and to considerations as well. Isn't that implicit in it doesn't have the plan that the policies in the plan I think it's to account and to considerations as well. Isn't that implicit in it doesn't have the plan that the policies in the plan I think it's to account system
those considerations are.
We could put something in the text that's helpful.
Yeah, that could be
it seems to me that
those considerations are.
We could put something in the text that's helpful.
Yeah, that could be
it seems to me that
considerations are.
We could put something in the text that's helpful.
Yeah, that could be
it seems to me that
we could put something in the text that's helpful.
it seems to me
well, perhaps it could be to think about the text, but I'm also minded that policy 1, which is another policy we're going to talk about, refers to something to think about the development text. But I'm also minded that policy 1, which is another policy we're going to talk about, refers to planning applications of full subsidy development. So it's contained within the plan, and reading the development plan as a whole, which also means your input strategy at the moment, also the town centre plan if you're in the town centre, etc. Contained within the plan, and reading the development plan as a whole, which also means your input strategy at the moment, also the town centre.
I think it needs to be
contained within the plan.
Respect to the guys
Reading the development plan as a whole,
I think we have a situation whereby the determination of planning, I think it needs to be because the site hasn't been included within the plan, then it was a situation whereby there has been determination of planning that could be interpreted because the site hasn't been as in the site not being assessed as situation where the employment being suited. That could be interpreted that this policy is looking at is whether a windfall development is acceptable against what a planning application would be assessed against, which is the development plan policies and any material considerations.
So I think the ambiguity really relates to where the comprehensive assessment has been undertaken, doesn't it? So I think it is your point that someone could read this and say, well, actually, it wasn't assessed as part of the plan and allocated, therefore it's inconsistent with it, rather than an assessment undertaken through the development management process against the policies of the plan. Now, it's clear, I think that's what the authors of the plan have in mind, the same thing as you, but I can see that someone else might wish to read a different meaning into that. So it's looking to reconstruct point Roman 1. So the site is assessed as being suitable for employment, development, proposed uses, etc., consistent with policies of development plan. Just to make it clear that actually there's not this dilemma if it's not safeguarded or allocated.
Yeah. It's a windfall.
Yeah. So it's just really to make that clear.
Okay.
I think that.
So would you like us to sort of come up with something? So
yes.
Yeah.
We'll give some thought to this. I mean, really what is required is the definition of suitable. And that's probably best in text if we indicate the factors which will be taken into account in terms of assessing suitability for the comprehensive assessment. I think that would address the point.
I think suitability is the assessment against the development plan policies in this plan.
Yeah, well, that's what the
material
text would.
considerations, and that just needs to be spelled out.
I mean, is there a need for maybe an additional paragraph in the explanatory text talking about consideration of windfall sites as well? Because I'm just explaining that so there will be sites that haven't been assessed through the sustainability appraisal, the habitat regulation assessment plan. They're not safeguarded or allocated, but these sites could come forward. These would need to be considered against the development plan and other material considerations taken into account as windfall sites, because it's not as if there's an approach to say that some areas cannot be developed. There's not a strict settlement boundary approach in this plan.
It is unusual that there is no supporting text to explain the policy context. It's one of the only policies I think in the document that doesn't.
We'd like the council to prepare main modifications around those matters, just to clarify and point them out.
Yes, I mean,
what is being assessed, how it would be assessed, and how a windfall site would be dealt with.
Okay, so yes, I mean, paragraph 8.18 talks about essentially about the windfall issue in any case, the first sentence of that. But yes, we can certainly look at that, sir.
I think greater clarity, just to explain this potential conundrum, would be helpful. I would also suggest it would be useful to engage with Litchfield as to this thought of wording, because should we get to main modification stage and then there's further substantial objection and we were to agree, that could, we then end up in a snake's ladder situation of going back down a snake again, back to potential hearings and so if that could be, we could seek some resolution, perhaps a very brief statement of common ground can be achieved would be quite helpful. I think at that point makes sense. You're happy to engage in the council? Okay, so that's So this on policy 18. Okay, so policy 17. Do you want to explain your thoughts there, please?
Yes, I think firstly, entirely supportive of the council's desire to safeguard existing employment land. I think that's obviously very important in terms of protecting a resource of land for the creation of jobs. I would, however, start from where we began with this discussion, which is why we have the NLP2 and the policies and what they're seeking to achieve. Policy S7 indeed does seek to deliver 28,500 jobs over the whole strategy period, but that's a minimum. That's not a fixed ceiling, and it does aspire towards the success of Northampton as a place where economic growth has taken place. And I think we've heard from Ms Banks with regard to the relative success of Pantone Park and other developments. Having said that, I think it's also important to take into account the evidence that underpins this plan, and specifically the need of the Northampton Employment Land Assessment. In particular, that reaches some quite troubling conclusions, which we've set out in Matter 5 and cross-reference with regards to the availability of employment land as a supply when measured against the rate of take-up of employment land, which again plays to the success of the local economy in terms of driving economic growth. But in particular, large-scale employment distribution. The NELA confirms or concludes at para 1.56 that there's only a supply of about 0.7 years. Now obviously that's at a point in time when that assessment was undertaken, and we've heard that other developments have progressed since then. But equally it talks about a one year's supply, paragraph 1.63 in terms of mid-size employment units, and paragraph 1.71 small industrial units, again about a 1 year's supply. And that's, I think what we have is a scenario obviously where more supply comes on board, and that's taken up by businesses wanting to grow and expand, and that in turn feeds the minimum 28,500 jobs. And that's very welcome, very positive. Policy 17 does seek to safeguard land that's already identified in the NELA, and I think the modifications to the policy map seek to bring through 4 of those sites. They're not new allocations. These are existing employment reserves that are identified through the NELA, and consequently, unless we move to a situation whereby NLP2 specifically identifies an additional resource of employment land, the rate of take-up of employment land across the borough is likely to exceed the available supply, and there is a risk, therefore, that there will be a stall in the ability for firms to grow and to accommodate new space. Now, as we set out through the representations, we've put forward a site at Bedford Road. It's currently going through, of course, a planning application, which we would hope in the fullness of time would be considered against Policy 18. There has been engagement. I've set that out within the reps and within the Matter 5 documents. We know from that application that, or from that particular site, the impact on the SPA, which has been the subject of pre-application dialogue with Natural England, to which the council are aware, and highways. There's a debate going on with Highways England with regard to those particular sites. But it's one example of a site which is there, which is available, which can come forward, obviously subject to satisfying the technical merits of its individual case. So I think, just to summarise that, we think that it's absolutely critical for this local plan, Local Plan 2, to identify an additional reserve of employment land over and above the safeguarded sites that are identified through the NELA and the supply of land that's identified through the NELA. Failure to do so, looking at the evidence within the NELA, just means that we're going to run out of employment land. and that will cause inevitable issues downstream.
So would you say the provision of employment land is a strategic matter though? It's something that's dealt with in the joint core strategy, and this plan is looking to deal with a particular spectrum of it, not really address the whole supply in the whole of West Northamptonshire. So a number of the SUEs cross the former council boundaries, etc. That involve things that aren't really before us.
No, this plan is here to deliver the policies of the JCS, quite simply. And in order to deliver those policies, it has to make some positive choices with regard to the allocation of land. And we would say it has positively achieved that with regard to the residential spectrum. Indeed, Duncan Investments, as we came to a hearing a couple of weeks ago, represent one of those sites. Absolutely does that. With regard to employment land, however, it simply doesn't. It identifies land through policy 17, which is safeguarding, absolutely great. It seeks to use policy 18, you see the policies map, which is perhaps the wrong vehicle for doing this, as we've set out within the representations, but it doesn't make any new employment provision to meet the JCS requirement of a minimum of 28,500 jobs. That's the test.
Well, we need to consider what the purpose of the plan is, and of course it's a Part 2 plan, and it would provide part of that solution, but there are other Part 2 plans that are adopted, and there's also the strategic allocations and the joint strategy. So this plan alone is not going to address any shortcomings in the provision of supply across the whole of West Northamptonshire. In terms of employment land provision, do you have any alternative evidence, current evidence, that suggests that there's deficit at the moment? The council explained ongoing development, and certainly driving into Northampton yesterday, there's quite a lot of construction of, I would describe as being crudely as being large sheds underway, but lots of other things that seem to have happened. Is there any evidence as the situation softens, as it tightens?
Well, look, the evidence.
Do you have any alternative evidence beyond that of the council where it acknowledges the problem? Can you
the local plan needs to be predicated on its own evidence, and the evidence of the local plan within the NELA shows us that there is a shortfall impending within both small through to large scale employment space. That's the council's own evidence base. So to not make any new allocations, yes, at this point in time there isn't a shortfall. The plan is being put in place to cover a period going forward over a number of years, and therefore surely it must be implicit within the preparation of that plan that it looks ahead and looks to allocate land to meet the needs of policy S7 and S8 in JCS. And if it's not doing that, then I think there is a problem with regard to unfortunately, the soundness of the plan. It's there to plan for the future by definition, and that means it has to make positive choices with regard to the allocation of land.
Okay, thank you. So, in terms of the council, so in terms of the role of this Part 2 plan, and what the joint core strategy has set as the requirements for the Part 2 plan, what does the council see as the role of the plan? What are you trying to achieve through it, and what specific allocations are you making for employment land through the plan?
The role of this local plan is to deliver the requirements set out in policies S7 and S8. So it is seeking to deliver net job creation and contribute to net job creation within West Northamptonshire.
But it's part of a number of Part 2 plans that are dealing with the non-strategic sites.
Exactly. In terms of allocations, we have allocated some new sites which are not part of the safeguarded sites. For example, the site to the north of Martin's Yard. It is given that we haven't allocated a lot of employment sites, but we did undertake a call for sites exercise. We did not get that many response, and we are required to deliver jobs and not just jobs within the traditional employment categories. So as I've already mentioned earlier, just from the allocations alone, and Junction 16, we can deliver in the region of 5,700 jobs.
And does the council have any evidence that it hasn't put into the local plan examination about some more up-to-date employment land monitoring? Was that likely to happen in the next few months? I mean, if not, if not, that's fine. But I'm just wondering if there's anything that has been prepared that casts further light on the situation, given that we've been through rather unusual times in the last few years, and there's been a construction here. I mean, if it's not available, so it's fine. It's not available. I'm just wondering whether there is anything.
We do have information that's in the latest joint annual monitoring report, which gives information about the supply and the monitoring updates for employment uses.
Okay, great. That's in there as an examination document, isn't it? So we'll take that away and have a look at that.
It is not currently as an exam document, but we can put it in. It is. Is it in? It's not. The annual monitoring report from the joint planning unit is not currently an exam
document.
monitoring
report, isn't it, that was put in?
Is it?
Let's have a look.
Is it in? Sorry, I may have.
I might be confusing it with the one.
We can make it available,
Yeah,
so
we can make it available. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's publicly available document. In fact,
It's available online on the Joint Planning Unit website,
Okay.
but we can make it available on the exam website as well.
Okay, that would be useful,
Okay.
useful context for us to consider the evidence before us. Okay, so in terms of the changes suggested to policy and that, what's the council's thoughts about changing the annotation? Because 17 is about safeguarding existing employment sites. So the existing employment sites have been subject to a review of that document, consider whether sites continue to be safeguarded as employment land as per the requirement framework. So are you suggesting that they should be allocated as such?
We are proposing to withdraw modification 10 and modification 11. We have reviewed the policies and concluded that they need to be withdrawn.
Okay, so that would take us back to where we are with the submitted plan, then, just
Yes.
for the points it out, yes. That provide some clarity. Mr. Kirby? Yeah.
So if those modifications are withdrawn, where does it leave us in terms of a specific position with regard to allocation? Doesn't that just remove the amendments on the policy map?
Well, policy 17 is about safeguarding, and so I would expect to see safeguarding annotation on the policy map in relation to the existing stock of employment land. The allocated sites are allocated through policy 38.
Policy 38.
Yeah. Okay, so then that's set at the table, and then they're shown as annotated on the policies map as allocations. So that's, I think I'm clear on that. And
We
then
will be reviewing the policies map as well and updating the annotations in the policy and the legend in the policies map as well to make it clearer.
Okay, so in terms of other sites that may come forward, those will be considered as windfall developments, and we discussed issues around policy 18 and the supporting text as to how those should be treated. And particularly, I have the concern, I think, is that the clarity about windfall being just that, and not that the policy shouldn't be read that because the site isn't allocated or safeguarded, it shouldn't happen. It's a windfall site and it needs then to be considered against on its own merits against the development plan policies and any other factors that may be relevant. So I think,
Yes,
so
that's right. So, I mean, in terms of the legend on the policies map, at the moment there's a stray one which we'll retitle. It says Employment Allocation Sites Policy 18, which is the light purple.
Yeah.
In fact, those are safeguarded. So there are effectively two safeguarded employment areas, and actually Policy 18 wouldn't have a designation on the policies map because by definition it's windfall. So that needs tidying up, but we're looking at that.
Yeah. Okay. So questions for us then. So that's the issue the policy map the council will look at, which clarifies I think the point about safeguarding. The allocation is going to be 38. We will take away and consider whether the plan and whether it's a role of the plan to actually be allocating specifically more employment sites. We will consider that, and that will be a matter we'll address in our post-hearings advice to the council. Okay, so we have those comments. Any other points around those principles?
So I think you've dealt with the concerns that we had with regard to paragraph 18. We can leave policy 18. I think we can leave the deliberations with respect to policy 17 with you based upon the evidence that's been put forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Wood, you were going to look as if you wanted to speak, and then you may have been answered.
No, do please, so if I may. Yeah,
Yes.
just in terms of where the employment allocations sit in the plan, certainly with the examination that's also policy 38, which currently has both housing and employment allocations within it. So we've reflected on that. I'll just mention it briefly now, and if you want me to get some more detail later. The intention is to expand on policy 13 in the housing section in relation to housing allocations, and to move the employment allocations out of policy 38 into the employment section. So possibly as a new policy 17A.
Okay.
So it would be the same list, subject to one or two modifications which we can talk about later, but the same as it's in 38, but it just, because it made more sense to live it into the employment section. Then you've got a comprehensive set of employment related policies, both allocation and safeguarding, and the windfall policy on
you may start up again, or should we just take the chance?
Okay, so that does it, so we're looking now to have the three policies in there, safeguarding, windfall, and the allocation employment policy do the same employment section, and that would then mean that we don't need policy 38,
right,
the list of all the various allocations within employment. There's also an education one in there, and housing, they can be listed out into the relevant sections.
Yeah, because we discussed last time's considerations about policy 38 in the previous session. I think it would be helpful to consider quantifying the amount of employment land then, I know it does exist in the plan, that would be coming forward under the new policy 17A, and give some consideration as to whether you could provide an equivalent jobs total that might involve from that. I know it's a particularly difficult thing to do, because the core strategy went about an approach with jobs, not dealing with land in the way that's more commonly done. that may be helpful to have in the explanatory text, and then just to make clear that we have the safeguarded sites that exist at the moment, we have the allocated sites, and this is what they're going to do, and then there's other sites that can be controlled by way of windfall, which we considered in the really again to policy 1 plus all the other policies of the plan going from policy 1. I think that gets us to a useful point. Thank you. That's useful clarification. Have you got any points on those issues that I've got? Okay, on policy 17, we raised a question about the marketing period, because the range set out was 6 to 12 months. And our concerns are, really, is this clear? And what happens if someone markets for 7 months? Is that acceptable for council or not? Is it 6? Is it 8? Is it 12? What's the council's view, and what is your evidence for that? Just to provide clarity. And do you actually have a policy set out separately from the development plan, somewhere where you set up and what your evidential requirements are in the development management process for marketing? Because it's something you like come across from time to time.
Okay, so
we haven't set out specifically what the marketing requirements are. We have, however, reviewed this decision based on the question that was set. We are therefore proposing to modify the requirement, and this is under modification 10A, and we will be requiring a period of 12 months as a marketing timeline, and this is in line with the Northampton Employment Land Assessment reference 1101, paragraph 10.5.
So does the council have any views on what actively and extensively marketed would be? Would you normally expect to reach an agreement with a potential applicant for
Yes, because
marketing?
this essentially seeks to explain a little bit more in terms of what's required in policy E1 of the joint core strategy. And so that the requirement for 12 months essentially just gives people an idea as to how long they need to be marketing the sites for.
Yeah.
And what we have looked for in the past is just evidence that they have been actively marketing the site for employment use.
But there's no prescribed
There's no
form for
prescription.
that, is
No,
there?
there isn't at the moment.
Okay. Can you just remind me of the joint core strategy? Does that allude to this?
Yes, it's in policy E1. Policy E1 actually says change of use to other non-employment generating uses will be resisted unless it can be demonstrated that the site is no longer economically viable for employment purposes in the long term. There is a clear conflict with adjoining uses, or its release would offer significant benefits to the local area. So the whole point of having the 12-month marketing exercise is to explain how that first part of that paragraph can be met. So it's the second paragraph of policy E1.